Good afternoon and welcome to this live chat webinar. I'm Louise Triance from UK Recruiter, as my logo, and I am talking with Lucy Kendall today, and I will let Lucy introduce herself in a moment. We're running this live chat ahead of the JobGate Summit. We're going to be talking about busting some of the myths of GDPR for US audience of job boards who are doing business in the EU. So this is a really strong focus on those businesses rather than businesses within the UK. And we will take any questions in the sidebar. I'm just going to share a link to the job board summit before we start, so you know what that event is, who we're being hosted by. So just before I introduce Lucy, I'm just going to tell you a couple of assumptions we've had to make. So the first thing is that you are delegates who are based in the US and you are job board owners or job board aggregators or involved in the job board space or recruiting space in some capacity. If you're not, you're welcome to stay on, you're welcome to ask questions. And the second assumption that we're going to make is that you know a little bit about the GDPR, and I have already shared a link in the sidebar. So that will give you some basics, because if we go over the basics, it's going to take us too long. This session's half an hour or so. We'll answer as many questions as we can. I'm going to pop myself into the sidebar now, so I'll be a tiny little image and Lucy will appear on screen. I'll still be asking her questions. So Lucy, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Louise. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Just a little bit about me. I've spent my whole career, so the last 18 years, in the staffing industry. I've worked in all the verticals. So I've worked in recruitment, I've worked in executive search, and I've worked in-house. And I've operated, all the way through to board level. And I think, particularly when we talk about the topic we're talking about today, the key thing for me is that I've been a fee earner and had all of that sort of pressure, as well as then sort of fulfilling ops roles. On my career journey, the sort of common thread, I suppose, has always been around customers and delighting customers and customer experience. And combined with that, really, I've always been in roles where when significant changes have hit the industry, I've normally been in a position to sort of advise and assist with coping with that thing. So for the last sort of 12 to 18 months, I've been advising and supporting businesses in the staffing sector with this GDPR thing, so this change in data privacy laws. So and that's why Louise has asked me to come and have this conversation with you. So here we are.
Fabulous. Okay, so I've got some questions I've been sent beforehand, and there are some questions which you can put in the sidebar as well. So my first question, and it's a great question, is what is the actual risk to the business or a job board in the US of getting this wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just generally, if we sort of perhaps comment from a staffing sector perspective, anybody that is processing personal data that is either of EU residents or those organisations that have locations within that geography. One of the big changes with this law is that we're moving now to a model where you have to demonstrate how you're complying with it. So I think for me, one of the big risks is of doing nothing. Basically, it's an absolute dead cert that things are going to go wrong in terms of personal data. So whether it's you have an incident where somebody loses something, or you have an incident with malware, so that at some point something is going to go wrong with personal data. And now what they've shifted towards is that you've got to be able to, for your first line defence is going to be to say, this is what we tried to do to avoid this thing from happening. And if you don't do that, then there's going to be very little tolerance or sympathy from regulators about that. So even if you're not entirely sure what you should be doing, do something. And if you don't, it doesn't bode well. The second risk is that there is a heightened sense of awareness from individuals about, oh, hang on, this personal data belongs to me and all these other organisations are borrowing it, but actually it's really mine. And the other thing, so with GDPR, it's got sort of a heightened level of the ability for you to sort of gain some real control over how your data is used. And this comes in this form of a set of rights. As a business, in any aspect of staffing and definitely with job boards, when somebody exercises those rights, so if they want to see what data you're processing on them, if they want to sort of restrict your processing or object to it, you've got to be ready to deal with that. And we've already seen that the regulators relatively intolerant of you not being able to even acknowledge or identify a request when it's coming your way. So you've really got to understand what these rights are and how your business is going to cope with them when you get one. The other thing is, obviously I've already touched on it, which is, a data breach. So we're shifting now from if you have a data breach, it's gone from being voluntary essentially to now being mandatory. In fact, we've just had an instance, you and I were just talking about it with quite a high profile case that's just literally happened with I think their applicant tracking system called PageUp, and they're HQ'd in Australia, but they process 2 million users' details with end clients, and they have experienced a data breach through malware. And this has now gone, in fact, Australia introduced mandatory reporting of data breaches in February. So that has had to be reported, and it's literally, we're just waiting to see now what's going to happen with all these different countries that have had to be notified globally, because it's involved people who live in their geographies, and we're just going to see what's going to happen. But that is a software firm, and that is a data breach. So basically, these things are going to happen. So you've just got to be ready to deal with these things. And then the one that obviously is the absolute no-brainer is the biggest risk to everybody here, is I'm sure everybody's worked tirelessly to build their businesses. And that good old saying that it takes you blimmin' years to build your reputation, and it just takes you a nanosecond to lose it. And because of, privacy is a human right, we all have an absolute right to it. So if you don't take privacy seriously, whether you're worried about GDPR, whether you're in a geography that maybe you think GDPR isn't going to, have a bearing on you, privacy is now a global movement. This is now changing. We're in a world that's advancing at a rate of knots, and so we have to get a grip of everybody's right to privacy. So that's a very long answer, but it will affect your bottom line. I think if you don't get this right, it's going to affect your bottom line. So.
Okay, so we've already got some questions in the sidebar, but I'm going to ask you, and I know this probably isn't in a nutshell type answer, but what should I have done by now? What should I be doing? Are you able to capture some of the overview of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's obviously, if you've got to comply with it, there's lots of component parts, but I think that I'd be thinking, you've got to have some form of data map of understanding what is coming through your business, what sort of personal information is coming through your business, and there's different categories of risk associated with that. So, for example, somebody's name versus somebody's social security number or their passport. There's a different level of risk associated with that. So understanding what on earth you're processing, what it looks like, who's got access to it, how secure is it, so how is it locked down at the moment, and who do you share it with? Really basic exercise of just understanding what you're dealing with, and that ultimately becomes a formal document called your record of processing, which is something that you need to have by law. But if you don't know what you're actually dealing with in the first instance, everything else sort of becomes a bit pointless. Then you and I touched on it in the data map. What measures do you have in place to protect that personal data that people are entrusting to you? So I guess understanding the risks in the first instance that the data could be exposed to, and then what are you doing to mitigate that? So, in really practical terms, thinking about, do you have some rules in your business around how you handle personal data and how it's safeguarded? What sort of cyber security do you have? I mean, I think if you are a job board, or a software firm, it must be like really high up on your agenda just to make sure you are as tight as you can be. And the regulators have said, if you have a data breach that occurs through sort of a technical, means, whether it's malware or, something like that, these things are unavoidable. We are all up against it in terms of protecting our businesses and from external threat. But you absolutely have got to be able to say, we did our best. We tried to make sure that we were really robust, really tight. We had a good IT policy. The other one that's really super important, if you haven't done it, is, for goodness sake, train your staff. Yeah, so that's all your full-time staff, all your permanent staff, all your temporary flexible workforce, anybody who is interacting with that personal data that's entrusted to you. They have got to understand what they should and shouldn't be doing. So we know that one of the first questions you're going to be asked when something goes wrong is, did you train that person? Did you ensure they understood how they should and shouldn't behave? And then that's sort of the internal bit. I mean, externally, you've got to have your privacy policy. So you've got to have, there are going to be journalists and people out there that are going to be surfing websites and just looking for that story to say that brand, so if you're on a fast track growth and lots of profile in the market, it will just take one journalist to go onto your website and say, oh, what's their privacy policy? So having that, commitment on your website, having it very clear that anybody who's passing you personal data or interfacing with you, they can just go on and see very, very clearly in clear, plain English exactly what you're doing. And those are probably, there's lots of things, but I would therefore say data map, understanding possible risks in your business in terms of how that data is being treated, having measures in place to protect it, so particularly cybersecurity, but definitely also then rules. Train your staff, please, please, please train your staff. And then the last one is being transparent, so having that privacy policy very publicly available. Whichever way customers touch your business, they should be able to touch your privacy policy.
Okay, cool. And we might come back to the privacy policy in a little bit if we get some questions around that, because I know when we've done these in the UK, I've had quite a lot of questions about what the privacy policy should cover. So we'll see whether we want to come back to that one. So you touched on something earlier about data processors, data controllers. Now, what is that? Why does that matter? Why do we need to know what we are?
So this isn't a particularly new concept. It's just that whoever is sort of defining the purpose and the means of the processing, which basically means, are you instigating the processing of that personal data for your business end? You're a data controller. And what happens in the world of work and business is that I might be, say, a staffing company, and I might be working in the oil industry, and I might be hiring people for it. But inevitably, I'm going to have a supply chain of partners who are going to help me be brilliant at what I do. And that might be I outsource my HR. It might be that I use job boards. It might be that I have a CRM piece of software. I might have a gamification software to motivate my staff. But what happens is we outsource stuff, and the stuff we outsource at times can mean that we're sharing personal data then with another selected partner of ours. And that's the key thing. We've selected somebody to help us be better at what we do. Let's say it's a CRM firm. That firm may be a data processor, very likely if it's a CRM firm. So what that means, a processor is somebody that's doing something on behalf of you, but what they do is not, they're not instructing or manipulating or there's any decision making around the data that they've got access to. So particularly, so a good example here. So I know that your next question will be give me an example for a job board. If I'm that recruitment firm hiring in the oil industry, I decide I'm going to use Oil Professionals for You job board. If I say to Oil Professionals for You job board, I'd like some job credits every month and I'm going to use it to put jobs on, people apply and then I get the CVs. That would be an example of a processor relationship, because I'm choosing to put the jobs on that platform. That platform's doing nothing with the data other than advertising it, and then inbound then comes the applications. Now, if you're a job board who typically then when people apply for jobs, they get put into this big population of a database, and then the job boards then flip that out and sell it and say, come and have access to this, all this data we've got. In that context, the job board is working as a data controller because they are determining the purpose and the means of that personal data processing. So they're doing it for their own business end to drive people to come and work with them, to access their data. So it's for their business benefit that they've sort of defined and created. So job boards have two roles. So you're either a data controller or a data processor when it comes to processing personal information. You're either acting on behalf of somebody else, they're in control, but you're providing them with something that belongs to them. They're fully in control of it, or you might be in a situation where with job boards, when they give out the access to that data, you're both data controllers, and with each of them, you then have different sets of responsibilities. So depending on which you are, then determines the amount of responsibility you have and what you should be doing in terms of complying with the GDPR.
Okay, and I think that for most job boards who either have a resume database or offer email alerts, they are going to be a data controller. They are taking in that job seeker information and using it in a variety of different ways. So that's the position they will mostly be seeing themselves in. Okay, great. So I ask a question from the sidebar now, which is Brian. It's a bit of a complicated question, but basically, Brian runs a resume parsing company. So he works with job boards and the resumes pass through him and out the other side. He's asking whether or not he needs to worry about GDPR. What does he need to bear in mind related to GDPR?
I mean, I think what's really important for everybody to understand is that even if personal data is flowing through you and you're not physically storing it, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't need to worry about the GDPR. So it needs to be very clear. If we think about something going wrong, so we think that what would happen in that with that organisation, that resume, I mean, it's a resume. So if it's passing through their platform, then there's got to be, I would imagine there's got to be some sort of trace of it. Trace of that personal data. If there was a cyber attack on that company, it's understanding if you're connected to the end client. I'm assuming that it might be possible for a cyber attack to come in at an access point there, and because you're connected to job boards or you're connected to companies, there's a definite risk. So for me, I think it would most definitely be what I would. It sounds to me like a data processor type of relationship, but there's a couple of. I mean, there's a list of about 12 things that data processors should be doing under GDPR. But the key things I would say is that you need to have a good level of security in place. So that's both cyber and physical, including training your staff and making sure that they know what they should and shouldn't be doing. But the other thing that job boards or clients might be asking you is you've got to now have this sort of breach detection. You've got to be able to know when a breach has happened, because whoever is relying on your services, i.e. whoever the data controller is, they are responsible and they have a very short window to notify a regulator about breach, which is what we've seen happening with this page up thing. You do not have a lot of time. So you've got to understand you do have responsibilities. You are doing that resume parsing on behalf of somebody else. So you've just got to understand the supply chain and who's responsible and what your responsibilities are to the data controller.
So how quickly do you have to respond to a breach?
So 72 hours. So what was I think what's been quite fortunate with the interpretation of we were waiting for some guidance around how this would translate. And fortunately, one of the sort of suggestions they made is that actually if you're a data processor, for a data controller, the 72 hours starts from when you as the processor notify them. But originally the text was going to say that you had 72 hours from when your processor was made aware. But thankfully they've built in a bit of tolerance. And it's 72 hours. It's not like 72 hours working days. It's 72 hours. So when there's holidays or Thanksgiving or whatever, and you find out on whatever day, the clock is ticking. So yeah, there's not a lot of time. So therefore, that's why it's written in as one of the responsibilities for processors is having breach detection and monitoring, because the timeline is so good.
And knowing what you're going to do if that happens.
Exactly. So we always talk about like fire drills, and just knowing like who needs to be in the room. And in fact, like in the UK, I don't know what other countries have done, but the UK have got this amazing, the regulators provided this amazing checklist of what will they want to know if you call them, because their breach notification is happening via a phone line. Other European countries might do it differently. But if you did have to ring the UK regulator, you'd be phoning them. And then they've provided this amazing resource on their website, which is literally like, these are the 8 questions we're going to ask you. And they're very nicely worded. They're very non-confrontational. And they're sort of saying, this is what you need to know. So if that would help people having, Louise, I'm sure we can, get that over to people, because to me, when I saw it, I was like, well, that is amazing. Because if you can then, it happens, you fill it in, you ring them and you say, we've got it covered. These are the answers, So, yeah,
I will find that and share that. I've got a follow-up question to this, but I am actually going to get you to answer Gary's question, because it's a bit of clarification about processor or controller. And his question is in the Ask a Question section. We are a software company that uses our software to recruit for other companies. We post their job, we collect the applicant data, and we perform phone screening. Are we a processor or a controller?
So, Gary, the question is, the candidate data that you collect, do you retain it after the end of the assignment? So if you keep it and you use it for other things, so say you use it to help fill other jobs for other people, then you would be a controller. But if you are merely doing something on behalf of somebody else, and at the end of that process, you then delete everything or you hand it to that end client, then you'd be a processor. So it's about who really owns that data. So that's the question. Do you keep it? So it would be very similar for executive search firms that use outsourced researchers. It's exactly the same for them. They outsource to a researcher to do all the long listing and things like that. Now, some of those people work in niche markets, and so they retain the data to help other people. And then they are controllers. But if they then do the long listing and then they do phone screening and then they hand it to the client and press delete, then they are processors.
Okay, so Gary's answered in a follow-up. Yes, we retain it. So he is a controller.
You're a controller.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you very much for that. So my follow-up question to your about like a fire alarm, it made me think of another question, which may happen, and it will start to happen, which is that what on earth do you do when you get a subject access request? I mean, how are we, because we're all going to get one at some point. What do we do?
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely like, I've sat in so many rooms with so many businesses, and they're like, we've never had one. We've been going for 20 years. And then literally a week later, they're like, we've just had one. So these are definitely going to become more commonplace. So for those of you that maybe aren't aware of just the extent of what this thing is that, people have got a right to say, what information are you processing about me? So that in plain English means that anything you have in hard or soft copy about that individual. So a good example in good old recruitment is interview notes. So this includes interview notes. This is not just information they've given you. This is anything that relates to them as an individual, you have to give them. And in the UK, we've just had the Data Protection Act passed on the same, it became live in the UK at the same time as GDPR, preparing us for Brexit. But they've written in an additional level here, which is that when you receive a subject access request, if anybody in your organisation edits, tampers, changes it, does anything with it after the date of the submission, that will be open to criminal sanctions. So at an individual level, so not at a company level, at an individual level. So whoever actually made those changes. So obviously within the context of recruitment, this is a really big deal, because it's not always that the information that's retained within recruitment businesses is the sort of information that you want to be made public. So you as job boards may receive them yourselves, or you might find that somebody goes. What we're seeing happening is people maybe don't always understand that their data is being retained by job boards, and when a recruiter says, when they say to a recruiter, "How did you get my information?" and they say, "We got it from a job board," what's going to happen is there's going to be sort of a multi-pronged attack on people putting in subject access requests. So again, these have got shortened timelines. So you've got 30 days to respond. Again, depending on, particularly for a staffing firm, how long they've known that candidate or had information about them. You can imagine the scale of this exercise. It could be a really, really massive exercise. As a job board, hopefully it wouldn't be, you wouldn't have as much data, but you certainly would need to be aware of it when it comes to your own staff, because don't forget, you've all got employees and they have got a right to do this as well. So internal conversations about somebody driving you insane and underperforming, and they were drunk on Friday night and inappropriately did something with someone, anything like that, that's all disclosable in a subject access. So it's definitely one to be a bit savvy about. Clean up your systems.
So that second part of that about your own employees, for a US job board, that's relevant where you've got operations around the world and you may have.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they can do that. So if you've got staff, exactly. Yeah, located globally.
Cool. Okay, right. I'm going to move on to another question I've had before the show, which is about marketing, because as job boards, we're marketing potentially to candidates. So potentially somewhere down the line, we bought a database of people in the oil sector and we want them all to use our job board. Can we still market to those people? Because these could be global people. What do we do in terms of marketing? Yeah,
I mean, marketing is it's a really difficult area to make simple. There's two pieces of legislation that impact direct marketing activity. So if we just stick with the GDPR for a moment, what the GDPR says really about direct marketing is that what typically happens in a staffing context is that somebody applies to a job. Let's just use this example. Somebody applies to a job, and you therefore have that's the purpose of your relationship. And then what typically happens in a staffing context is they get added to your database unbeknown to them. And then you decide to then mail shop them or send them email marketing repeatedly over the next however many years you're still in contact with them. So what the GDPR says is that you've got to be really clear with individuals about the different purposes that you're going to use their data for. So GDPR is essentially saying, marketing to somebody about job opportunities is a very different purpose to that of helping somebody find a role at that point in time. So it's not that you can't do it, it's just you have to be clear. If we go back to the privacy policy, you've got to be clear with people as to what you're going to use their data for. So a good example from a job board's perspective is that, we're going to help you find your next role by you registering on our job board and applying to that job. But actually also we're going to retain your information and you're going to become part of our community. We might sell your information on to others. So be transparent about it, number one. The second thing is that there is something called the e-privacy directive. Again, and actually in the US, you've got the national, as I've just done a bit of research, the national do not call registry. Okay, so that is for phone, as I understand in the US, that gives individuals, consumers, the ability to say, just do not ring me at home and harass me. So in Europe there is this e-privacy directive, and it's a bit more. It expands further than the US version because it covers all electronic communication. So in plain English, that is phones, texts, emails, and then if anybody ever still uses them, fax machines. But it governs how it gives control to us all about how we can control the level of direct marketing that occurs to us and how we can kind of get a grip of it. That has been law, for example, in the UK since 2003. So this isn't a new thing. It is currently going through European Parliament, and we expect a new version for it, fit for purpose in the digital age, next year. And that is likely to significantly transform the approach to new business development. Really, the way that I condense what it's all about, and there is a brilliant checklist for anybody that is directly marketing, say within the UK environment, which guides around what you can and can't do. So there's a part of it around phones, which is really similar to the National Do Not Call Registry. It shouldn't be a surprise to somebody to hear from you from a direct marketing perspective. So these buying and selling of lists, this is really going to become something that is going to be cracked down on. So it's not that you can't do it, but you've got to be transparent about it. So people should be expecting to hear from you. They should have consented. If you're dealing with consumers, they should have consented and positively opted into hearing from you in that context. B2B, it's a bit more gentle. It's a bit softer. There's a soft opt-in, which sort of means if they know who you are, and if you exchange business cards, if you pop them a note on LinkedIn, that's sort of like a soft opt-in. And people have always got to be able to opt out. So the really big thing I would say to anybody that is directly marketing, particularly on email, people have got to be able to say, leave me alone, and you have got to listen. And if you don't listen, what we see is the biggest fines, the most aggressive responses from regulators are to do with direct marketing, the fact that people don't listen. So you are invading somebody's privacy by not listening and not upholding their right to say, I don't want to hear from you. So it's all about driving up great customer experience, really, because if you build good relationships, people should be, happy to hear from you. So it's definitely something to watch. I would watch to see what's going to happen in the future with email marketing. So I would definitely get it right now, because there is more change coming, and the change that's coming is going to be challenging.
Okay, cool. So thank you for that. So as well as having a privacy policy on the bottom of your emails, an opt-out always, or leave me alone, however you want to word it.
Yeah, and I think, certainly with technology platforms, there's definitely a way at the front end of giving people the right to say, I would like to hear from you about this. And I think, maybe even getting a bit more granular, because if you can break down what people want to hear from you about, it'll probably mean that they're likely to tick something. If you just do it sort of generically, they might feel a bit terrified. But if you break it down and say, then I think you're probably likely to be more successful. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to, but like I said, it's been law for 15 years, but I definitely see it becoming like more, and also actually I should say that in the UK, so the regulator, the Information Commissioner, they released a report just at the start of this month, and they did a report on nuisance activity. So there are big fines that we've had in the UK. Well, probably to the US guys will not seem like big fines, but they're quite big for what has. I think there was a £500,000 or allowance of how much you could fine, and all the biggest fines, like the £450,000, £500,000 fines, they were all for this sort of activity. And under the nuisance section, recruitment appeared for the first time. And we were the worst performing sector for nuisance email marketing. So I would just say that the industry, the staffing industry, is on the radar. We're renowned for perhaps being slightly irritating with our email marketing. So definitely something to
yes, here it is now. Head of real estate, retail, gambling and insurance. That's a bit depressing, isn't it? I've shared that link. Okay, so I've got a question. Actually, I'm going to ask Clive's question because it's a follow-up. I'm in the process of launching a job board, wondering whether GDPR applies to me directly marketing, cold calling prospective business clients. So I guess you've answered that there, which is
yeah.
That I think probably we've just covered that, but I will add some additional stuff in the blog around that direct marketing. Cold calling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just reading what everybody's saying just in case I've missed anything. Yeah,
I'll try and go through as well. So I heard somebody say something online to me the other day, which was, I'm not going to take any applications from EU residents. So this was a guy who ran a job board in the States, and he said to me, literally, he just said, well, it's not going to matter because I'm not going to take applications from the EU. What do you think of that?
Brilliant. Great, that's a great strategy. I mean, you could do that. I mean, I've spent, obviously, I've been immersed in this topic for a while now. I mean, I just think, don't be frightened of it. So, I mean, if you genuinely only really want to focus on business activity in the US and you're only dealing with domestic residents, then, you know, for now, maybe, maybe you don't need to worry about these things. I mean, I would say just caution everybody. I mean, I think California's going through this at the moment, but there's a lot of debate in the US at the moment about what they are going to do about privacy, because privacy shield's wobbling a bit. So I do think it is actually going to end up. There's going to be some of it everywhere. So it's not going to be just this thing that occurs in Europe. Lots of countries around the world are following suit. So I just think, don't be frightened of it, and it is quite simple. All it's saying is that you've got to show that you care about privacy, that you're transparent with people, that you can show your workings in terms of how you've tried to be appropriate and secure in terms of how you handle people's data. I mean, I think it has definitely. There's been a huge amount of fear. There's been a huge amount of mixed messaging. So I can see how somebody would just go, right, well, forget this. I'm just not going to deal with EU residents. But I would say, don't be frightened of it. This is just another thing in the evolution of business infrastructure that you've just got to get your head around. And it's not about catching anybody out. It's saying we've got to step up now. The world has changed massively, and we've got to show in a much more vigilant and respectful manner that we are looking after data. And it is quite simple, she says. It is quite simple in terms of like what it is you need to do. And I think it's just, if you care about your customers and you want a robust, profitable, sustainable business that at some point you want to sell, you can't ignore this. You've just got to get on the boat and do what you need to do. But I mean, you could, if you wanted to, just change your entire business strategy and only deal with US residents. But I can't help but think, China, South Africa, Australia, everywhere, Canada, everybody's having, everybody's got to step up. So I just think it's going to hit you in some way, shape or form.
I think that as a business, I mean, the person who said this to me was a really, really great guy. I'm not going to criticize him, but I think that as a business, if you care about the people who you're interacting with and you are comfortable being transparent with them about what you're doing with their data, then this is not a massive change. Like you said, it's not, I mean, it felt a bit like everyone was going to be caught out, like speeding fines, but that's not what this is about. It's about making the process right for the individual, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I just think it's, I've thought about my own, like conduct. And I think that when I just think in staffing, sometimes we do forget that the piece of paper that we've got in front of us that's got, somebody's name, their home address, their kids' names, the kids' ages, their social, national, social security, their salary, we're holding on to so much information that really, quite frankly, could cause harm to individuals. And we just don't always, it's just a point in time where we've got to remember that information isn't ours, it's somebody else's. And it's traded all over the globe. It's sent over regular email. And so when I think about what they're asking of us, I'm just like, this is like the right thing to do. It's not, yes, it might feel like, oh, it's a bit of a change, it's a change. Everybody, adapts to change differently. But, if you do want to build loyal relationships, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're at the bottom here. We're at the base level of like survival, of like food, water, and, this is like, you've got to treat people's personal data in the right way. And So yeah, and I do think it's process. I think it's just about people just saying to people, this is how things happen now.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
And be vigilant, be vigilant and understand what's being entrusted into your briefcase or your inbox or your, so yeah, don't be frightened of it, basically.
No, I agree. And when we're thinking about what we are storing on a database, it brings me to the next question I have, which is, and this is as relevant to a job board who keeps a resume database or email alerts, or as to a staffing agency, is that, I've collected resumes on my site for 12 years, and I've now got 2 million resumes. I don't want to delete those 2 million resumes, but I've got to make a decision about what's right for the individual. And this, I think, is probably something which in the UK we've looked at a lot, but globally, how do you make a decision as to how long you keep someone's details like that, a specific job seeker's details?
So you've got to think about, so one of the other principles is accuracy. So I think it's quite simple in staffing. So if we talk about staffing companies, and I'll use that as the context here because it will help. I mean, it's as applicable really to job boards. The questions you've got to ask yourself is, what reasons do you have for keeping the data? And is the data that you're keeping, is it representative of who that person is today? So the things that I would be thinking about is, if we're talking about staffing and people and recruitment and people moving roles, and how, things to think about is what sort of level of candidate are you working with? So if you're dealing with a non-exec or a director or a VP level, those people will move job less. They've sort of got their suite of skills that they've developed over their career. But if you're dealing with a graduate, really quickly, that graduate's details are going to go out of date because you change very quickly at that level. So your pace of change, your pace of development, evolution, and skill set, even changing direction and going from the law profession, and now you've decided you're going to work in real estate. So as recruiters and as staffing professionals, our job is to represent candidates and help them find work or fill jobs. So the big thing around retention is you've got to think, how long is that information? How long can I keep it before that information goes out of date? Because what happens is, if you keep that data for 12 years and say you do a search on that data and then you send email alerts, you are likely to irritate a lot of people because that IT graduate is now VP of IT at wherever, Amazon, I don't know. But so the issue we have is, it's not, in our industry, it's not how long do you keep it, it's is it up to date? Have you had connectivity with that individual in order to then demonstrate that you've got their back, you can represent them in the right way? So those are some things to think about with retention. So I think for job boards, the challenge job boards have is that if people who use your resume searching facility to find candidates, so they get called in about a job and they think, go to this job board to go and find suitable candidates, and then maybe they use the resume parsing company to parse. The problem you have there is, if the job board's CV database or resume database is 7 years old or 8 years old, then you're searching CVs or resumes that are already massively out of date. Then you're taking them from there and putting them onto your CRM, and it's already out of date. You already do not have, so if you call them and you catch up with them and you get an updated CV, everybody's winning. But if you then keep it, you can't get hold of them, and then you've got old data on your CRM already. So you have to think about accuracy. How accurate is the data? You have a duty to keep it up to date. So you have to think about that in tandem with retention. Obviously, there are legal reasons to hold data. If you do contractors or temporary workers, there might be legal reasons why you have to keep financial records, same with your staff. So there might be other laws at play that define how long you should keep the data, but always think about it in relation to accuracy.
Okay, and I think that probably answers Mark's question around that balance and making the decision. One of the things I've seen a lot in the UK is that when we've got our head around why this is okay, it's around using it as an opportunity to engage better. So the way in which it's done really badly is email sent out saying, GDPR is coming, subscribe again or we can't contact you. Now that looks dreadful.
We consent, yeah.
Engagement piece to say these are the reasons why we want to keep in touch with you, these are the reasons why we hope you'll keep in touch with us, has been very successful, and everybody can benefit from the opportunity to re-engage with their database.
Exactly. And we know some tech vendors that obviously focus on and doing exactly that. I mean, the way I talk about data retention is I always say, think about your balance sheet. Do you want the data, that personal data, all of those contact details, all of those resumes? Do you want it to be an asset that drives the value of your business, or do you want it to be a liability? And having dirty data that's not up to date, data that people don't know you've got, that will be a question in a sale and acquisition, funding. People will start asking you the health of your data. So let alone the engagement, but which I totally agree with you. If you don't, I feel like I feel like I am being transported a bit back in time, because when I first started in staffing, because we didn't have a lot of the technology that exists now, but I had my calling in book, and I had to keep in touch with people. I wanted to know who was working for my competitors. And it was like a relentless game of just building your relationships all the time. So I do feel like we're going back to that, about that customer engagement, and I do think that will only benefit everybody.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that unlike those few years ago when you were doing it, the technology now exists to do that much more effectively. So, and job boards can be a part of that.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think technology has got such a critical part to play here. So it's about getting your own house in order. And then I just think, without technology, I don't think it's doable. If we rely on humans, we'll be struggling.
Okay, now we're 45 minutes in. We are well over time. I've got 2 more questions I'm going to ask. Sorry. And this was a question we had before the show, which was, I sell job seeker traffic in the form of redirect clicks. Do I need to worry about GDPR?
So I think that the biggest issue here is always around transparency. So, if you are upfront with people as to exactly what is going to happen to their data, and they can then take responsibility for it. So say, for example, it enters a business A, and business A is interfacing with that individual, but business A doesn't tell the individual that 5 other businesses will get access or will be passed on that data, then that individual has got no ability to control how their personal data is being used. So this is absolutely like the DNA of GDPR. So you've got to look at it in the context of, if business A says, hey, we're the window, and actually behind the window there's an absolute load of rooms, and your personal data for this mutual interest that we might have, whatever that might be, will be going to these other places. If you just say that via your privacy policy, then the individual has the ability to be able to then go wherever they need to say, hey, do you know what? I want you to delete my data, or I want you, I want to see it, or whatever it might be. But they then can control it. So I think that's probably what I'd say most importantly about that. So if it's not clear to the user or the individual of what is going on, then you're not being transparent.
Okay.
So that's very much about who you're sharing data with. So that's if you're sharing it with other controllers. If it's a processor, obviously, you do have a responsibility to give an indication that you do share their personal data with other processors. But obviously, if they wanted to exercise the rights, they come to you.
Okay, cool. So that's about transparency again.
It's literally, the 2 words that I just say to everybody I ever talk about this is transparency and accountability. So being super clear about what you're doing with the data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then secondly, showing your workings in terms of how you're complying with what the law's asking of you.
Okay, I love that. Now, this leads me to my last question, which is, should we all have got a lawyer to help us sort this out?
Oh, well, the lawyers obviously have done quite well. So well done, the lawyers. I mean, I think that, I mean, I've spoken to lots of lawyers about this, and it's really interesting that a few people I know were saying to me that up until so many years ago, lawyers did nothing around policies or drafting policies and things like that. And then they suddenly encroached into it. So if you needed a policy, you'd go and speak to like a HR consultant, or, you know, you'd bring in that sort of expertise. So I definitely think the lawyers, there are certain things I think you could definitely lean on a lawyer for. So obviously within this, within these relationships we've all got, there is a contractual element. So it's important where you're a controller or a processor with these relationships that you have suitable addendums to your contracts in place. So I guess that's, you know, if you've got a current suite of terms and conditions and you needed to add in a refreshed element to data protection, then yes, you might go and pay somebody to do that. But other than that, I think all of the other things that you need to do, I think are, you know, either there's resources you may be able to find available online. If you're part of membership bodies or professional bodies, there might be resources there. But a lot of it is about, if you've got people within your business that can do it, you know, a lot of this is about setting a suite of rules so that everybody knows what they should and shouldn't be doing. I'd lean on your IT provider to actually step up and give you more guidance around the cyber element, and maybe then leading into then how staff should be conducting and behaving with their technology and their kit, and when they're working out of the office, logging into public Wi-Fi, etc., etc. And then there are consultants. You know, there are people out there. There's a massive community of sort of data protection consultants. Find somebody who does understand the staffing sector, because if they don't understand the staffing sector, it can be a bit painful. But I would say you don't have to spend ridiculous sums of money on a lawyer to advise you. You're better off trying to do a bit yourself, trying to find some free resources, and then, you know, trying to see who else you can lean on, or colleagues or people that are within your space that might have done the same thing themselves. So yeah, I just think you don't need to be spending a fortune, but it is worth having somebody on your team who can give you maybe a bit of perspective externally, I think, to help you with policies, processes and things. So
okay, cool. And that industry support is certainly what I've seen a lot of, is people saying, so when I did my privacy policy, I don't know, 8 people said, can I borrow yours? Now, I said yes, because you helped me do mine, Lucy. So if you can find somebody who's already doing it well, having a conversation with them, and at the summit in Nashville, the job boards who are there will have an opportunity to chat with each other, to see what you're already doing so far, and to be a support network for each other.
Definitely, because it's not a competitive issue. It's about raising everybody's standards.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right, well, we're 52 minutes in, so we ran over slightly. Thank you, everyone who stayed with us. If you need any more information, I've put a link to Lucy's LinkedIn profile in the comments. I'm going to be creating a blog post around this, so will the guys at JobGate, and we'll share it with everyone. And I know both Lucy and I are happy to connect on LinkedIn. So thank you ever so much, Lucy, for answering those gazillion questions. And thank you, JobGate, for making this happen. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.